The tower that screamed. The tower was never meant to burn. It had stood for centuries, older than the city that now surrounded it, older than the walls that claimed to defend the kingdom, older even than the stories whispered in taverns and temples. Built of stone that had endured storms, sieges, and the slow erosion of time, it had always been a symbol of permanence. Something that would outlast men. Something that would remain when everything else had fallen. But now, it burned. Not like wood. Not like a building. But like something alive. Flames coiled up its height in violent spirals, clinging to the stone as if they had been waiting for this moment to devour it. The fire did not simply consume. It clawed, it roared, it fed. Black smoke poured into the sky, thick enough to choke the sun itself. Ash fell like snow, coating the courtyard in a layer of gray that smelled of ruin. The air was wrong. Too hot. Too heavy. Too loud. And beneath it all, there was a sound. A sound no one wanted to hear. A scream. It had come from inside the tower. Not once. Not twice. But again and again. Each time weaker than the last. Each time more desperate. And each time more impossible to ignore. Yet no one moved. The crowd that watched. The courtyard was filled with soldiers. Dozens of them. Armored. Armed. Trained to face death without hesitation. Men who had stood on battlefields soaked in blood. Men who had watched comrades fall beside them and kept fighting. Men who were not strangers to fear. But this was different. Because this was not a battlefield. There was no enemy to strike. No formation to hold. No command that made sense. There was only the towers. And the fire. And the knowledge of what waited inside. Is it still alive? The question came from somewhere in the crowd, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the roar of the flames. No one answered at first. Because no one wanted to. Another scream echoed from within the burning tower. This one shorter. Broken. Painful. A soldier swallowed hard, it shouldn't be. Another shook his head slowly, nothing should survive that. But they all knew better. They all knew exactly what was inside. And what it meant. The thing inside the flames. Oh, dragons. The word was spoken in a whisper. As if saying it too loudly might summon something worse. Not a legend. Not a story. Not something distant and imagined. A dragon. Captured. Chained. Imprisoned. Taken weeks ago from the northern mountains, dragged down in iron and blood as proof of the kingdom's strength. It had been a victory. A symbol. A warning to enemies. A prize to be displayed. And so they had locked it in the tower. High above the city. Far from escape. Far from help. Secure. Contained. Controlled. Until now. The tower cracked. A section of its outer wall split with a thunderous sound, sending chunks of burning stone crashing into the courtyard below. Sparks exploded outward, scattering like fireflies of destruction. The soldiers flinched, instinctively stepping back. Heat surged across the ground, forcing them further away. It's going to collapse, someone said. The commander stood at the front, his expression hard, his eyes fixed on the inferno. No one enters, he said firmly. No one argued. Because they had already seen what happened to those who tried. The cost of trying. There had been ones. There was always one. A young soldier. Too eager. Too brave. Too foolish. He had run forward before anyone could stop him, shouting something about duty, about honor, about not leaving anything alive that could threaten the city. He had reached the entrance. Had barely stepped inside. And then, the fire had taken him. It was not dramatic. Not heroic. Not something that would be sung about. It was fast. Brutal. Final. His scream had lasted seconds. Then nothing. The memory hung in the air, unspoken but heavy enough that no one needed to mention it again. No one goes in, the commander repeated. This time, no one even looked at the towers. The man who did look away. Except one. He stood at the edge of the formation, slightly apart from the others. Not by rank, not by orders, just by nature. Kale. He wore the same armor as the others, carried the same weapons, held the same position. A guard. Nothing more. Nothing special. No medals. No recognitions. No reason for anyone to remember his name. And yet, he was the only one still looking at the tower, because he had heard the scream. And unlike the others, he had listened. Another cry echoed from within the flames. Weaker now, fading, but still there. Kale's jaw tightened. That's not rage, he said quietly. The soldier beside him glanced over. What? That sound, Kale said, not taking his eyes off the tower. It's not anger. Another scream. Short, sharp, desperate. It's fear. The words settled heavily between them. Uncomfortable. Unwelcome. Doesn't matter, the other soldier muttered. It's still a dragon. Kale didn't answer. Because for him, it did matter. The weight of what was done. He remembered the day they brought it in. Everyone did. The sky had been filled with smoke then too. But not from fire. From war. The mountain campaign had been brutal. Cold. Unforgiving. And filled with things that didn't belong to men. The dragon had fought. Even young as it was, it had fought like something born of fire and storm. It had taken soldiers with it. Broken lines. Burned through formations. Until they overwhelmed it. Chains. Hooks. Spears tipped with poison meant to weaken something far larger. It had fallen. Eventually. But it hadn't surrendered. Kale remembered that part most clearly. The way it had still struggled. Still roared. Still tried to stand even as the chains dragged it down. Not rage. Defiance. And something else. Something he hadn't understood then. But understood now. Fear. Because it had been alone. The argument that meant nothing. Stand down, Kale. The commander's voice snapped through the air like a whip. Kale didn't move. Did you not hear me? The commander demanded. I heard you, Kale replied. But he didn't turn away. That creature is contained, the commander said. The structure is compromised. We will not risk more lives for something that should never have been brought here. Another scream. Weaker. Almost gone. Kale exhaled slowly. It's going to die. Yes, the commander said, and that is acceptable. The words hit harder than the heat. Kale turned then. Finally. Acceptable. The commander met his gaze without hesitation. It is a threat. It's chained. It is still a dragon. It's trapped, Kale said, his voice rising slightly. It can't escape. It won't need to, the commander replied, if it lives. Silence. Because they both knew what that meant. If the fire didn't kill it, they would. Kale looked back at the tower. Another crack split the air. Another section collapsed. And the screams were fading. The choice. You go in there, the commander said, his tone quieter now. You will not come out. Kale nodded. I know. And for what? The commander pressed. A creature that would kill you without hesitation. Kale didn't answer immediately. Because the question wasn't simple. It should have been. It should have been easy to say yes. Easy to agree. Easy to step back and let the fire do what it was already doing. But he couldn't. Because that wasn't what he had heard. That's not what it sounds like, he said finally. The commander frowned. What? It doesn't sound like something trying to kill, Kale said. Another scream echoed from the tower. Barely audible now. It sounds like something trying not to die. The words hung in the air. And for a moment, no one spoke. The line no one crossed. The tower groaned again. Louder this time. Time was running out. The commander exhaled slowly. If you go in there, you go alone. Kale nodded. No one follows, the commander continued. No one rescues you, you understand. I do. You will not be honored for this. Kale almost smiled. I'm not asking to be. A pause. A moment where something unspoken passed between them. Then, stand down. Kale stepped forward. Guard. He didn't stop, because the decision had already been made. Not in that moment, but the moment he heard the scream. Into the fire. The heat hit him before he reached the door. A physical force, like walking into a wall. It stole the air from his lungs, burned his skin, blurred his vision. Smoke filled his throat, thick and choking, forcing him to cover his mouth with a cloth as he pushed forward. Behind him, no one followed. No one called him back. Because everyone knew. There was nothing to say. Kale reached the entrance, or what remained of it. The doorway had partially collapsed, flames pouring through the broken stone like water through a shattered dam. He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awareness. This was the point. The lines, step forward, and there would be no coming back. Another scream echoed from above. Faint, almost gone. Kale stepped inside, and the world became fire. The wings that defied the fall. The tower did not fall all at once. It resisted, for a time, as if the ancient stone itself remembered what it had been: strong, unyielding, unbreakable. It groaned under the assault of the flames, cracked beneath the relentless heat, but still it stood. Still it fought, but fire was patient, and time was cruel. The collapse begins. From the courtyard below, the soldiers watched in silence. They had pulled back now, forced further away as chunks of burning debris rained down in violent bursts. The air shimmered from the heat, distorting the tower into something unreal, a wavering silhouette against a sky turned black with smoke. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. He's dead. The words came quietly. Not cruel, not dismissive, just certain. No one argued. No one needed to. They had all seen the flames, felt the heat, heard the screams. No one could survive that. The commander stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the tower. Unmoving, unreadable, but his jaw was tight, and his hands were clenched. He chose this, someone muttered. The commander didn't respond, because that wasn't what troubled him. It wasn't the choice. It was what the choice meant. Inside the inferno, Kale could not hear the tower collapsing. Not anymore. The world had narrowed, shrunk, reduced to fire and breath and pain. Everything burned. His lungs, his skin, his eyes. Every breath felt like swallowing embers. Every movement dragged against air so thick it might as well have been liquid. The staircase beneath him cracked as he climbed, fragments breaking away and falling into the inferno below. He did not look down, because there was nothing to see. Nothing but fire. He climbed anyway, because the sound, the scream, still echoed above him. Fainter now, weaker, but still there. And that was enough. The room of chains. When he reached the top, the world changed. Not quieter, not safer, but different. The fire here burned hotter, brighter, more violent. The ceiling had already begun to collapse, beams hanging at impossible angles, stone fractured and glowing with heat. The air shimmered, warping the space itself. And in the center of it all, the dragon. It lay where they had left it. Bound, broken, chains wrapped around its limbs, its wings, its body, heavy iron restraints bolted deep into the stone floor. The metal glowed red from the heat, searing into its scales. It had struggled. That much was clear. The floor was cracked beneath it, claw marks gouged deep into the stone, the chains stretched taut from repeated attempts to break free. But it hadn't escaped. And now, it couldn't. The dragon lifted its head. Slowly, its eyes locked onto him. Bright, burning, not with fires, with fear, the moment of understanding. For a second, neither of them moved. The dragon's body tensed, muscles coiling instinctively despite its injuries. A low sound rumbled in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a warning. More reflex than intent. Kale stopped, raised his hands. Slowly, "I'm not here to hurt you." The words meant nothing. The dragon did not understand them, but it understood something else. Tone, movement, intent. Kale did not advance, did not reach for his weapon, did not move like the others had. And so, the dragon hesitated. That was all the time they had. Breaking the unbreakable. The ceiling cracked above them. Time was gone. Kale moved. The first chain was wrapped around the dragon's foreleg, thick iron links anchored into the floor. It was glowing red, almost white in places. He grabbed it. Pain exploded through his hand. It was instant, violent, absolute. The smell of burned flesh hit him a second later. He didn't let go. Instead, he drew his sword and swung. The impact rang through the room, metal striking metal in a burst of sparks. The chain didn't break. Of course it didn't. These weren't meant to be broken. They were meant to hold. Forever. Kale gritted his teeth. Swung again. And again. Each strike sent vibrations up his arms, shaking his already weakening grip. The heat, the smoke, the strain, it was all too much. But he didn't stop. Because the dragon was watching, and it had stopped struggling. Not because it had given up, but because, for the first time, it didn't understand what was happening. Trust forged in fire. The third strike cracked the chain. The fourth shattered it. The broken links fell away with a heavy clang, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the roar of the flames. The dragon jerked in surprise, pulled its limb back. Free. It didn't attack, didn't flee. It just stared. At him. At the human who had done something that made no sense. Kale didn't stop. He moved to the next chain. And the next. Each one the same. Each one harder. Each one costing more than the last. His strength was fading. His vision blurring. But he kept going. Because now, the dragon was no longer afraid. No, it was watching him. The last chain. Only one remained. The largest. Wrapped around the dragon's chest, pinning it to the ground. Holding it down. Keeping it from standing. From escaping. From living. Kale raised his sword. His hands trembled. The blade felt heavier than before. Too heavy. His arms refused to steady. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one weaker than the last. He knew he wasn't going to make it. Even if he broke the chains, he wouldn't make it out. But that had never been the point. He swung. The impact sent a shock through his entire body. The chain held. He staggered. Nearly fell. The dragon shifted. Made a sound. Low. Urgent. Not a warning. Something else. Kale steadied himself. Raised the sword again. And swung. The chain cracked. Not enough. But close. One more. Just one. The moment everything changed. The ceiling gave way. A massive beam tore free, crashing down beside them in a burst of fire and stone. The floor shook violently, cracks racing outward in jagged lines. The tower was collapsing. No, Kale didn't look up. Didn't hesitate. He put everything he had left into the final strike. And brought the sword down. The chain shattered. Freedom. For a heartbeat. Nothing moved. The dragon was still. Silent. Uncertain. Then, slowly, it pushed itself up. Unsteady. Weak. But free. The chains fell away. The weight lifted. And for the first time since it had been taken, it stood. The cost. Kale collapsed. His legs gave out beneath him, his strength finally gone. The sword slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly against the stone. The world tilted. Spun. Too hot. Too bright. Too loud. He could barely see. But he didn't need to. Because he knew. It was done. The dragon was free. That was enough. The choice. The tower began to fall. This was it. There was no escape. No path downs. No time. Kale closed his eyes. He had known. From the moment he stepped inside. This was how it would end. And somehow, that was all right. Because the screaming had stopped. Because something that had been afraid wasn't anymore. That was enough. Then, something touched him. Warm. Not burning. Alive. His eyes opened. The dragon stood over him. Its wings spread wide, shielding him from the falling debris. Its body positioned between him and the fire. Its eyes locked onto his. And in them, there was no fear. No angers. Only joys. The leap. The tower collapsed. Stone gave way. Flames surged. And the dragons moved. It grabbed him. Carefully. Gently. And leapt. Out of the fire. Into the sky. The sky that came to answer. The sky changed before anyone understood why. At first it was subtle. So subtle that no one noticed it immediately. A shift in the air. A pressure that settled into the bones rather than the skin. A quiet heaviness, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the world seems to hold its breath without knowing what it is waiting for. The flames had died down. The tower was gone now, reduced to a smoldering ruin of blackened stone and collapsed beams, smoke still curling upward in thin, bitter spirals. Ash drifted through the courtyard, settling over armor and weapons, over the broken ground, over the silence that followed something none of them could fully understand. Because they were still trying to understand what they had just seen. A man had walked into fires. A dragon had carried him out. And neither had destroyed the other. That alone had shattered everything they believed. But the day was not finished with them yet. The silence after fire. Kale lay on the ground, barely conscious. Pain was everywhere. It wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't even distinct. It was a dull, overwhelming weight pressing down on every part of him, making it difficult to move, to breathe, to think. His armor was scorched, blackened in places where the heat had been too intense. His hands were burned, angry, blistered, raw from gripping chains that had been heated nearly white. His lungs still fought for air, each breath shallow, uneven, as if the fire had followed him out and settled inside his chest. But he was alive. And that alone felt unreal. Something shifted beside him. Warm. Large. Careful. He forced his eyes open. The world blurred, shapes and shadows swimming before slowly pulling into focus. The dragon. It lay near him, its body curled slightly, wings partially extended as if it had not yet decided whether to protect him or simply collapse. Up close it looked even smaller than he had thought. Not harmless. Never harmless. But not the terror the stories made it out to be either. Its scales were dulled with soot, several cracked or chipped from the chains and the fall. The edges of its wings were torn, the thin membrane scorched and uneven. Its breathing was slow, heavy, each rise and fall of its chest carrying the weight of exhaustion. It should not have survived that fall. Neither of them should have. And yet, here they were. The line that changed. The soldiers had not moved. Not immediately. They stood at a distance, weapons in hand but lowered. Not relaxed, never that, but uncertain in a way that was far more dangerous. Because uncertainty led to hesitation. And hesitation around something like this could be fatal. The commander stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the dragon. On the man beside it. On the impossible thing that had just happened. No one gave an orders. Because no one knew what the order should be. Attack. It would be suicide. Retreat. And leave a dragon alive inside their walls. Wait. For what? None of it made sense. Not anymore. The dragon's head lifted. Slowly, its eyes moved across the gathered soldiers, watching, measuring, not with the blind fury they expected, but with something far more deliberate. It knew what they were. It remembered. Chains, pain, capture, and yet, it did not attack. Kale shifted, letting out a low, strained breath. The dragon's head turned immediately, focused on him, not on the soldiers, not on the threat, on him. That changed things. The first act of trust. Easy, Kale whispered, his voice rough, barely more than breath. The dragon tilted its head slightly, listening, not to the words, but to the tone. It's okay, he murmured. A light, but not for the reason they might think. The dragon hesitated. Then, slowly, it shifted. Just enough. Just enough to give him space to move. The soldiers tensed. Several hands tightened on their weapons. One wrong movement, one sudden motion, and everything would fall apart. But Kale didn't reach for a sword. Didn't try to stand. Didn't act like a threat. He simply stayed. And the dragon did the same. Two beings who should have been enemies, choosing not to be. The weight of watching eyes. Commander, one of the soldiers whispered, we can't just stand here. The commander didn't respond immediately, because he was watching something far more important than fear. He was watching restraint. The dragon could have attacked. Even injured, even exhausted, it was still faster, stronger, more dangerous than any one of them. But it hadn't. Why? Because of the human beside it. That was the only explanation that made sense. And that was something the commander had no training for. Hold, he said finally. The word was quiet, but it carried. No one attacks. A murmur passed through the soldiers. Uneasy, doubtful. Oh, sir, that is an order. The murmuring stopped. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over. The sky responds. The shift came then. Sudden, unmistakable. The air changed. It pressed down. Not with heat, not with smoke, but with something deeper. Something older. The dragon reacted first. Its head snapped upward. Body tensing. Eyes wide. Then, it made a sound. Soft, weak, but filled with something that did not belong to pain or fear. It was a call, and it carried up beyond the smoke, into the open sky. Kale felt it, not as sound, but as something that moved through him. A vibration, a resonance, something answering something else. What was that? A soldier whispered. No one answered, because they all felt it. Something was coming. The first shadow. At first, it was nothing. A distortion in the sky. A movement behind the smoke. Then, a shape. Large. Far too large. It moved slowly at first, emerging from the clouds like something that did not belong to the world below. Then another's, and another's, until the sky was no longer empty. No, someone breathed. Because they knew. Even before they could see clearly. They knew. The sky filled with fire. The first dragon broke through the clouds. Massive, ancient. Its wings stretched wide, casting a shadow that swallowed the courtyard whole as it descended. The beat of those wings sent a shock through the air, scattering ash and smoke in violent waves. Then another followed. And another's. Dozens. The sky darkened. Not with storm, but with wings. Dragons. Not hatchlings. Not prisoners. But the kind spoken of in stories. The kind that ended kingdoms. The kind that did not forgive. The fear that froze the world. Weapons lifted. Instinct. Training. Fear. Hold, the commander shouted. The word cut through the rising panic. Do not attack. Some hesitated, others didn't. One soldier raised his crossbow, hands shaking. I'm not dying like this. Stand down. The command cracked like thunder. And somehow, it held, because deep down, they all knew, if they attacked, there would be nothing left. The arrival. The first dragon landed outside the courtyard. The ground shook. Stone cracked. A second landed on the wall. A third circled above. They surrounded the city without effort, without resistance, without needing to, because they had already won. The judgment, the largest of them stepped forward. Each movement slow, deliberate. Its gaze swept across the soldiers, across the ruined tower, across the courtyard, and finally, stopped on the hatchling, alive, free. The air grew heavier, because now, the question was not what they would do, but why they hadn't already. The human answer. The commander stepped forward. Alone, because if there was going to be an answer, it had to come from someone willing to give it. We took it, he said. No point in lying. The dragon's gaze shifted to him. And you chained it. The words were not spoken aloud. They were felt, inside every mind. The commander did not flinch. Oh yes, a rumble passed through the gathered dragons. And yet, the great dragon's gaze moved again. To Kale, it lives, silent, because the answer was standing right there. The truth that could not be denied. Kale pushed himself up, every movement a struggle. But he stood, because this mattered. More than pains, more than fear. It was going to die, he said. The great dragon watched him. And you saved it. Not a question. A fact. Kale nodded. Why? The word echoed through him. Simple. Impossible. He took a breath. Because it was alone. Silent. Because it was afraid. The hatchling shifted closer to him. And because he paused, no one else would. The moment of decision. The world seemed to hold still. Because that answer was not what they expected. It wasn't power. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even courage. It was something else. Something quieter. Something older. Something understood. The great dragon lowered its head. Closer, examining him. You chose its life. Its gaze shifted slightly. Over your own. Kale didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was written in his wounds. The change. The dragon turned. And everything changed. Because it did not attack. It did not burn. It did not destroy. Instead, it knelt. And one by one, so did the others. The meaning, the soldiers stared, unable to understand. Because this was not submission. This was acknowledgement. Respect. For something they did not even have words for. The promise. The great dragon looked at Kale one last time. You have reminded us. The words settled like embers. What your kind once was. A pause. And what it may yet be again. The hatchling pressed lightly against Kale's side. And for the first time, he understood. He had not saved it alone. It had saved him too. The sky that answered. The dragons rose. One by one. Wings biting against the air. Power, freedom, and something else. Recognition. The hatchling lingered. Just for a moment. Looking at him. Then, it leapt. And joined the sky. Not as a prisoner. But as one of them. Epilogue: the man who chose. Long after the dragons were gone. The story remained. Of a tower that burned. Of soldiers who watched. And of one man's. Who did not. Not for glory, not for reward, but because something was suffering, and he refused to look away. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the sky was clear and the world was still, shadows passed overhead, watching, remembering, answering, because one choice had been enough, and it would never be forgotten.